Welcome everyone to this bonus episode of the Antinatalist Advocacy podcast, where we speak to interesting and knowledgeable people about how best to protect sentient beings from the harms of coming into existence. I am your host, John, an antinatalist advocate from the UK, and I'll be the main host of the podcast going forward. By the time this episode comes out, it will only be a few days until the Antinatalist Advocacy Conference 2023, Antinatalism at a Crossroads, which will be held on the 2nd and 3rd of December on our YouTube channel. We've already spoken quite a lot about this conference on the podcast, so I won't go into too much detail about it today. We will add some helpful links to the description below. This is just to say that we hope you've marked it in your calendar and you're as excited for the conference as we are. This bonus episode will be a recording of a live stream on Lawrence Anton's YouTube channel on the 1st of January 2023, where Lawrence and I responded to criticisms from fellow antinatalists about the direction that we are looking to move antinatalist activism in, namely by aligning it with thinking from the Effective Altruism community. We thought it would be good for people to be able to share their concerns and have us respond to them, because we really do value the opinion of the wider antinatalist community, and we're committed to taking on board constructive feedback. Now that antinatalist advocacy has been launched, we are definitely looking to set up similar opportunities for people to share their queries and concerns, so please let us know if you think this is something that we should do more of going forward. Also, I realised that for quite a few episodes in a row, it's been just Lawrence and myself. I just wanted to say that I'm sure you're now very bored of hearing Lawrence's voice by now, and that we've got plenty of external guests lined up coming to you soon. Please keep your eyes peeled for those. Anyway, without further ado, I bring you this bonus episode of the Antinatalist Advocacy podcast with my good friend Lawrence Anton. Enjoy.
Today is a bit of a special one. So what we're going to be doing is a little follow-up, I guess you could call it, to a conversation I had I don't know, a while ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, with John, and it was about effective altruism and antinatalism, and basically floating the idea of using like the effective altruist model and applying it to antinatalist activism and seeing, is that the best thing to do? If it is, what would it look like? Just starting a conversation around it, because I thought it would be a valuable conversation, right? And, I put that conversation up, I put it out there, and it got some positive feedback, got some negative, I don't know if feedback is the right word, but comments, questions, criticisms, etc., stuff like that. And so I thought it would be good, because I think it's an important topic and something that we should have a conversation about. I thought it would be good to do a follow-up and get John on again. So, John.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Lawrence. Hope everyone who's watching is well. Thank you to everyone who watched the previous video and left comments and criticisms. Looking forward to tackling some of those criticisms now.
Nice. Cool. All right. So I was thinking I reckon the best way to go about this is, so I've collated a bunch of the questions, criticisms, comments that people made, and put them in a document and have compiled them, and John and I are going to go through them, share our thoughts, see where we think maybe we didn't communicate that well, maybe other people have misunderstood what we've said, or people have raised valid concerns, criticisms and questions, and
we've got to leave that option in there too, Lawrence. People have legit criticisms, and it's not just misinterpretation.
No, obviously people have valid things that have been said and things that I've agreed with and stuff. So I wanted to bring all of that to the is the saying the thought or the forefront, bring it to the limelight, have a little conversation about it. And yeah, so that's what we're going to do today. We've also got two people who left their thoughts, who are going to be joining us later. And I think they're probably watching at the moment. I'll let them know. I'll send them a message when like we get to what they wanted to share, and we'll get them on and we'll have a conversation about it. But before we get them on, I wanted to do a tiny bit of preamble before we get into any of the sort of comments and stuff that people have had, because I think it'll be a bit of worthwhile preamble. So
Yeah,
the preamble is, and I will let John talk at some point soon. But so the preamble is basically what my intentions for this stream are. So I think some people, and this is by no means all people who watched the conversation that John and I had before, but I think some people interpreted it as, and maybe, John and I, in the way we spoke, maybe we did imply this, although I definitely didn't mean to imply it, is that I think some people took it that we were being sort of like overly prescriptive in what we were talking about. I think both of, at least my intention anyway, and I think John's was the same for the conversation we had, was that we just want to open up that conversation, and essentially we wanted to get other people's views and criticisms and stuff, because like neither of us are like the Messiah or anything. It's like we're we can come forward and be like, we will bless thy with our knowledge and foresight what is best for antinatalism or whatever.
I mean, you might not be the Messiah, mate. I definitely am.
Exactly. Yeah, the Messiah after a hefty haircut and a shave. So that was not and I don't think that was John's intention with it, to say this is what antinatalists need to do and this is how we're going to do it. It was more to explore the topic and put forward a point of view which I don't think has like fully been fleshed out before, like the sort of bringing together of effective altruism and antinatalism. I know that, for example, David Benatar has touched on that before. He did a response to Peter Singer once, but by no means did he sort of, I think, cover the variety of topics that we did in our conversation. And the second thing I wanted to say is that I think antinatalism, or at least antinatalist activism, is at like a very pivotal point in time, because I haven't been around in antinatalist circles for ages, like a couple of years, but my understanding is that basically up until like round about now, it's mostly been online, and it's mostly just been like internal conversation. There has been external like interactions with the rest of the world, but a lot of it has been like discussion online and internal conversation, and we're getting to a point now where we're starting to be a lot more front-facing. We're starting to actually go out there and essentially try and make a tangible change in the world on a larger scale than has been attempted before, to my knowledge anyway. And so because we're at that pivotal point in time, we want to be, having as many conversations about how best to do that as possible, right? Like, we don't want to just go out there and essentially, spend loads of our time doing something that actually doesn't make a difference in the world, or we, maybe to a certain extent we embarrass ourselves. Like, I know I'm definitely going to do that in the future. I've done that in the past, like embarrassing myself. So yeah, I think these conversations are important, and I think they're important to have specifically right now. So before we go into it, do you have any preamble you want to go over, John, or do you just want to get into some of the thoughts and stuff that people have shared?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you said there, Lawrence. I think something that's a really important point that you made before was that these ideas are quite new as they're applied to antinatalism, and that there aren't teams of people trying to figure out exactly what antinatalist activism should look like going forward. Lawrence and I were definitely presenting our best understanding of the data and of the lay of the land. But as you said, Lawrence, neither of us have untouchable credentials or expertise in this field. We are
Speak for yourself.
Oh, sorry, I certainly don't. Obviously, we've both read a lot, listened to a lot, and have thought about these ideas before. But we definitely wanted to get people's criticisms, their ideas, their takes on what we were putting out there, because we haven't. Again, it's just the two of us. We don't have a huge team of people working on these problems full time. So, really appreciate all of the concerns and criticisms that have come back, and yeah, looking forward to tackling them. I was wondering though, did we want to quickly, in 5 minutes or so, just restate the key points from that last video for anyone who might be?
Yeah, I can do a super quick. So basically, what we said in the last video was, so effective altruism is a movement that essentially seeks to do good in the world, but they want to use reason and evidence to maximize the amount of good they do in the world. Obviously constrained by certain ethical guidelines. They're not going to go out and cause violence, stuff like that, or at least that's not abiding by the principles. So that's basically what EA is. They're trying to do the most good in the world using reason and evidence. Now, that framework that EA has come up with, essentially trying to encourage constant self-reflection, seeing what are our goals? Are we sort of effectively achieving them or moving towards them? That framework has been to a certain extent applied to animal rights as well, although there's still a diversity of views on how to go forward with animal rights, and that was my introduction. I think maybe it was your introduction as well through animal rights, or maybe you got introduced. Yeah. So essentially, John and I had a conversation, and we thought, well, what if this framework is applied to antinatalism rather than going out and doing activism that we don't actually know is doing anything? Maybe we should go out and do activism, but with the mindset of constantly trying to find out what is effective, what are the things we should be focusing on, and how should we actually be trying to address those. And in the conversation, again, and this is by no means prescriptive, this was just John and I's sort of general impression, is that the 4 key areas that antinatalists would be concerned with are human procreation, the breeding of animals in things like, agriculture, wild animals, and artificial intelligence, because these are all ways that sentient beings are and can be brought into existence. Some are more pressing than others at the moment. Some are on a bigger scale than others at the moment. But those are the 4 main areas where bringing sentient beings into existence is sort of occurring, and that antinatalists would be concerned with. And one of the things that we both sort of concluded was, which is maybe where some of the disagreement is, because it's sort of counterintuitive for antinatalists, is that actually human procreation probably isn't the main thing we should be focusing on if we're concerned with preventing sentient beings from coming into existence. So I think that's like a pretty decent overview of what obviously that's not all the nuance that we discussed, but that's a pretty brief overview. If you want to see the whole thing, I'll link it in the description. Our previous conversation before we, our previous conversation after the stream, I'll link it in the description. But so let's go on to some of the themajigs. So the first one, I won't say who it's for. I won't say so. Just for the interest of people's privacy and stuff, we're not going to share who these are from. Unless obviously there are people who are going to be joining us and coming on. Obviously, they're free to share their identity if they want. That's up to them. But yeah, we're not going to be sharing the identity of any of the people who have put forward feedback or comments that haven't given us consent to do that. So the first one that was sent in by someone is, so effective altruism often focuses on forms of activism that are not particularly like emotionally gratifying, or aren't generally considered to be emotionally gratifying. And if we base antinatalist activism around EA's model, it may alienate activists who are currently doing good work or could be doing could start doing work, but they may be alienated by the form of activism that antinatalism takes if it goes down the EA route. So what do you think about that, John?
Some of the more effective forms of activism, like donating money, that kind of thing, using your career, can be less gratifying than other forms of activism. Certainly vegan activism, where you come together and you hand out a load of leaflets or whatever you do, that can feel much more in the moment gratifying than sitting by yourself and setting up a direct debit to a charity. I definitely agree that that's the case. In terms of what we do about that, I think we can try and encourage people to get involved and find ways that are emotionally gratifying, that don't compromise the impact of the activism, if that makes sense. I think that we should still promote the effective forms of activism, but have things outside of activism that can fill certain like social needs, by having things like socials, creating a community, Facebook groups, Discord, whatever it might be. I don't think we necessarily need to make sure that the activism is all that gratifying, so long as people are still getting those social needs met through other means. I think it would be potentially a little dishonest or a bait and switch if we chose forms of activism which were more appealing but less impactful, and then encourage people to move away from those, because people may have joined to do things like, say, street demonstrations or something like that, and then find that we're talking about donating and changing career paths. I think that we shouldn't compromise the integrity of the activism that we promote by not focusing on impact or doing that bait and switch. I think we can just acknowledge that that form of activism may not be particularly emotionally gratifying or socially satisfying, and then try and meet those needs outside of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. My sort of answer to this one would be that, I think, established, forms of activism that EA promote, I agree, cannot, for many people, will not be emotionally gratifying. And like you said, John, we can get emotional gratification more from being part of a community and encouraging in-person meetups, stuff like that. But also, it may be the case that there are forms of activism that are actually very effective in antinatalism that aren't in wider EA. We just maybe don't know about them yet, right? So there could be forms of activism that are emotionally gratifying and effective, because those two things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not like you get an emotional kick but you don't really do much, or you do loads but you don't get anything from it. It can be both. But the thing is we just kind of need to experiment and try different things with antinatalist activism and try and figure out what is most effective, because at the moment, we don't know. Like you said before, no one's working on this full time. No one, is looking into what are the best forms of antinatalist activism in terms of actually bringing about tangible change. So yeah, I agree. Some of the forms of activism cannot be emotionally gratifying, but we can find emotional gratification elsewhere, but also we may pioneer new forms of activism that are emotionally gratifying and effective.
Definitely. And one more thing as well, Lawrence, is that you can try and make those forms of activism more emotionally gratifying. So Giving What We Can, for example, has created a community around charitable giving. So charitable giving, donations, which can be quite a solitary act, by creating a community around it, people therefore find the act of giving more emotionally gratifying and more appealing than they otherwise might have done.
Yeah, 100%. So let's go on to the next one from this person. And then once we've done this one, we will get to bring on the first person who's going to come on and share their thoughts. So
sounds good.
Let's do this one first. So there's a risk of, if we sort of apply the EA model to antinatalism, naturally we will just become more associated with them because there will be more links, both in terms of, you know, people making connections, but also the ideas we talk about, stuff like that. So there's a risk of making antinatalism even more marginalized than it already is, because it could inherit the bad press that effective altruism has gotten. Not that it's like absolutely like wallowing in bad press, but recently, like with, you know, the Sam Bankman-Fried debacle and stuff, it has had some bad press, and so that could move over to antinatalism, and vice versa as well. Like mainstream EA, which is doing good in the world, could actually become criticized and marginalized from an association with antinatalism. If you know, if the antinatalist community generally tends to move more in that direction. So what do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true. I think that's a very real consideration. As you said, it works both ways. Antinatalism being tarred with the bad publicity of EA, and EA being tarred with the bad publicity of antinatalism. I think, I can't remember who said this, but there's a phrase that there is never a perfect solution. There are only ever trade-offs. And I think this is absolutely true here. Through applying this EA model, there will be trade-offs, and I think potential bad press on both sides is one of those trade-offs. We just have to try and balance that between trying to be as impactful as possible with antinatalist activism. And I think personally, again, I could easily be swayed, but I think this is a trade-off worth making. You know, we could play it really safe and not look at impact, not apply this EA model. And I think the potential negative drawback, publicity-wise, is definitely worth the potential positive impact that we could have for many, many sentient beings.
Yeah. Just to let people know, I think the first person who's going to be joining us is joining soon, so they might pop up on screen. But yeah, we'll just round this off and then move on to them. So yeah, my sort of thoughts on this is that, yeah, I agree. It is like, yeah, it is a risk. To be honest, hey, Alex is here. Can you hear us? Okay, nice one. We will get to you in like very soon, but we're just going to finish off what we're talking about on this point. So yeah, I agree. There's a risk. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I just think it's a trade-off that you know, people are going to have to make if they want to take part in this sort of thing. It's a decision they've got to make. Yeah, the only other thing I would say is, like, I'm not entirely convinced antinatalism has like a massive reputation that can be smeared at the moment. Like, the vast majority of people don't even know it exists. So to a certain extent, we're starting from a blank slate. Like, don't get me wrong, as soon as people hear about it, they're not going to like it. So it's not like I think
we know what's coming. So,
yeah, I don't think we're starting from a blank slate that's going to be all like roses and rainbows and, you know, but yeah, I think I agree that it's a risk. I just personally think it's a decent risk. You know, it's a decent like road to go down, and the risks are worth it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't see it as a massive risk. I think a lot of people are intelligent enough to realize that like one drama that happened does not sort of like make an idea invalid, but.
And one more thing I was going to say to Lawrence, just to add to your point, is that I think there's a difference between being aligned with the EA community and being aligned with the EA framework. I think the EA framework of using reason and evidence to do the most good is still just as valid, no matter what goes on within the EA community, if that makes sense. I think Sam Harris made a very good point after the whole SBF debacle that no matter what individuals within the EA community have done, in this case, it doesn't undermine this whole idea of using reason and evidence to do the most good, of using the EA framework, even if the EA community is in a bit of a rough patch at the moment, to put it mildly.
Yeah. But I do think that whole debacle has raised some valid points that need like reflection. But like, yeah, like you said, it's yeah. But anyway, I think we've done that point. So now let's like Alex has joined us. Hey Alex, hopefully we'll be able to hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah.
Yes.
Hopefully there's not going to be any technical issues, because this is like the first time that I've done this thing of like people coming in and stuff, and we've already kind of fucked up a lot. Yeah, I don't know, before we like actually start talking about any of your thoughts, if you want to give any sort of brief introduction of where you're coming from in terms of things you've done with antinatalism before, completely up to you. But if you want to just go straight into talking about the actual stuff, then we can do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of antinatalist activism, the most that I've done is just obviously like stuff online and street outreach. And it's interesting because like I've done vegan street outreach as well, and it just seems like when it comes to antinatalism, it's a little bit easier to get that individual change, in my opinion, and it's a lot more effective because if someone decides to not procreate and not bring another person into existence, like that's massive, right? Like that's the goal that we want, is for people to opt out of it. So I think relative to vegan or animal rights activism, street outreach, I think, in my opinion, it's more effective. But again, like that's my opinion. It's not based off of like any actual research or anything. And I don't even know if research like that even exists right now. Because like antinatalism activism just hasn't been around for very long. So and I think there definitely is kind of a negative opinion about antinatalism. It's always kind of related to or associated with eugenics or eco-fascism. Or, restricting people's bodily autonomy, and that's been going, and Malthusianism. So I feel like antinatalism already has a bit of an uphill battle with the negative connotations, just because people are so misinformed, and it's very clear that they don't understand what any of those things are. If you think that antinatalism is eco-fascist, you obviously don't know what antinatalism or eco-fascism is, and because they just don't relate. I mean, so
well, so on your point about like comparing vegan like street outreach to antinatalist outreach, I actually agree with you. So full disclosure, I've also done like loads of vegan outreach. Like I've probably done like over 1,000 hours of it. Like I've done so much, I've spent so many hours talking to people on the street and have the same thing said to me over and over again. But I've not done any antinatalist street outreach. But my impression is that just from what I've heard from people like doing antinatalist street outreach, it seems like there has been a more positive reception than with vegan outreach. I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know. That's just my impression I've gotten from what people have said. But yeah, like you said, there hasn't been research on it, so we don't know. I think there has been research on vegan street outreach, yes, but there hasn't on antinatalist outreach, and it is a different topic and people relate to it differently. So I agree that we can't categorically say that street outreach in antinatalism is, like ineffective or a waste of time or something like that. I think it's a completely valid form of activism to do. We're just in a period where we can't really say things for sure. Like we just need to like kind of get stuck in, see where that lies with different forms of activism, and try and get some research done so that we can kind of work our way through this sort of period of being in the dark about it.
I definitely agree. I think we are doing a lot of extrapolating from animal outreach to antinatalist outreach, and the two are different. One thing I would say is that sometimes this is mostly talking about animal outreach, when it comes to street demonstrations and that kind of like individual change outreach, people say, well, it's very hard to evaluate and get data, which is absolutely true. It is very hard to do it, and there isn't a ton of data out there. But I don't see that necessarily as a reason to keep doing it, if that makes sense. To me, that feels like more of a reason to switch to outreach, like the corporate campaigns and changing laws and practices that we do have good data on, rather than saying we don't know whether or not this is impactful, can't say one way or the other, therefore let's just kind of crack on, if that makes sense, which has been the perspective that I've encountered quite a lot when talking about impact with animal rights people. Which, again, another extrapolation I'll just make from animal rights activism to antinatalist activism.
Well, I'm a big believer that I think we need both systemic and like societal change, right? Because what's the point of having systemic change if people's mentalities haven't changed at all? If things aren't enforced? You can have laws on the books, but if no one's there to actually enforce them because no one really gives a crap about it, then what's the point of having, all of this kind of stuff in terms of, systemic change? So I think there needs to be a balance of both. And
definitely
you could apply that to antinatalism as well. Like if, there was some sort of like systemic change, I don't know, something that doesn't infringe on anyone's like bodily autonomy or anything like that.
Yeah.
But the mentality wasn't there that, hey, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Then like, what's the point of having that systemic change?
Yeah, like things like access to contraception and abortions would count as a systemic change. Laws around that, making them more freely accessible. And we've all been there with animal rights people, where we've talked to people who say, oh yeah, we need to like change the system, bro, and it's like, yeah, we do, but you can still choose not to eat a chicken sandwich like you are right now. And it gets, I think systemic change is sometimes used by people to deflect away from individual change, and it's like, to propagate the ideas, you need to be seen, absolutely should be doing, acting as an individual too. And again, that's tangible impact that we can have by not having children, not bringing sentient beings into existence. That's tangible impact that we are having.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree that like individual change and systemic change need to go hand in hand.
Definitely.
I agree on that. I don't think I have anything else useful to say on that topic. You guys have covered it.
Or any other topic. No,
or any other topic for that matter. So, Alex, I've like because you left a comment on, I think it was the YouTube video, but I am getting confused on like who left comments where. But I've like collated them, and I picked out like 3 main points from what you said. But I didn't know if you wanted me to read those, or if you just wanted to sort of share them in your own words now. It's totally up to you.
No, you can read them, and then we can talk about it. So
cool. Yeah. So the first one is like I said like I recapped at the start of the stream. So in the initial conversation John and I had, we touched on the topic of wild animals, and how that's one sort of cause that we think antinatalists would be concerned about. And Alex mentioned in the comment under the video that isn't this like sort of human supremacist in a way to inject ourselves into nature and the sort of natural balance of things that exists at the moment, and isn't it a bit sort of grandiose to assume that we can sort of eliminate the suffering of wild animals when we can't even eliminate the suffering that we're creating ourselves and continue to create with for domesticated animals and other human beings as well. So hopefully I've sort of like summed that up well. So John, do you want to sort of share your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely support that argument as it relates to rewilding, because my goodness, many vegans, environmentalists, they want to spread nature far and wide. If that argument persuaded people to not try and increase the amount of biodiversity there is, I'd support it wholeheartedly.
In terms of like playing God and intervening in nature, I think I wouldn't consider this anymore an invasion. Thinking about it in terms of the individual animals, I don't see why preventing wild animals from reproducing would be any more ethically problematic than preventing, say, like domesticated animals from reproducing. A lot of people get their pets spayed and neutered because they are concerned that the animals that those pets and may have, like the children those pets have, would live bad lives. And I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. And then we just need to reflect on the kind of lives that a lot of wild animals live, with most wild animals dying in infancy. The R-strategist animals, the animals that produce lots of offspring, how they are, suffer and die tremendously just so that one adult from the species can live to reproductive age. So I don't think it's any more ethically problematic than what we do for domesticated animals like pets. And I think that in some ways it is, maybe, I don't know if speciesist is the right word, but drawing the distinction like that between like wild animals and domesticated animals feels a little off to me. Like, we recognize the potential suffering of our pets and the suffering of domesticated animals, but then when it comes to wild animals, we're a little more hands off with their suffering, and I personally don't think that's justified.
Mm-hmm. I guess my counter to that would be in regards to the domesticated animals and, spaying and neutering. And I mean, for me, I definitely think it's kind of, like we're violating their consent when it comes to spay and neuter. It's not like we can ask them like, hey, is this okay? Or, they can't tell us no or anything like that. But it's, like, we've created that problem with domesticated animals, like, we're, as humans, the only reason why they exist is because we brought them into this existence. We created, cats and dogs and these, pigs and cows and the chickens of today, etc. So I think it's more so kind of like a solution to a self-made problem, whereas to wild animals, I mean, they existed before we did, basically, like, we haven't really touched wild animals in that sense. So it's like, are we trying to solve a problem that, I can understand why people would want to solve it, but like, is it really necessary? I guess. So.
Yes. I'll just quickly interject. So like my thoughts on this, I think I do understand people's reservation with sort of, for want of a better phrase, like meddling in nature, or however you want to put it. I do understand people's reservation, especially like vegans' reservation, because I think vegans recognize the abusive relationship that humans have had with other animals, but ever since we've existed, basically. So, we're not on like solid ground in terms of our reputation with treating animals with respect and compassion and empathy. So I get why people, especially vegans, are hesitant with humans getting further involved with animals. My sort of thoughts on it are like, on one level, like, we are involved with wild animals anyway, whether we like it or not. Like, we are constantly impacting their lives at the moment. For the vast majority of cases, that is in a negative way. And so I think if we can essentially, I honestly, I don't think there's any chance that we're going to stop impacting their lives and interacting with them. So if we can at least change those to positive interactions, I think that would be good. And I think the only other thing that I would say is I do understand what you mean when you say that, like, with domesticated animals, it's like we caused that problem, because like we did, if you cause a mess, you're the one who should be cleaning it up, right? Whereas technically we didn't cause the mess of wild animals. But I think when you look at it from the perspective of the individual animal, like a pig or a gazelle, a pig in a farm or a gazelle out in the wild, like they don't really care why they're here, whether humans created them or it was just through a natural process of breeding. Like their suffering, wherever it's coming from, is going to matter to them, and I'm sure they'd appreciate it being alleviated. I don't know if I can speak for animals, but if I was in their position and I could rationalize on it, I would want someone who could help me to help me. So yeah, I understand that it's not like, there is a difference with that we caused the suffering of domesticated animals and we haven't caused all of the suffering of wild animals. Some of it just exists independent of us, but I don't think the source of the suffering for the animal really matters to them. They just kind of, want to avoid it. I don't know if either of you have anything else you want to...
No, I agree 100% on it.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. So I guess with that, it's like, if we want to, essentially, like, what would be the solution? Would it be, like sterilizing wild animals? And if we can apply that to them, and essentially, I guess, like, violate their consent, what's stopping us to say, okay, well, let's do that with humans too, and violate their consent and their bodily autonomy as well? So,
No, it's a good question. And actually, oh, sorry, no, you finish, Alex.
I was just going to say, my next point would be to, when you look at the extinction rate that we currently have right now for wild animals, and it's obviously based off of like human existence and procreation and things like that, you could even argue that, human procreation could definitely reduce animal suffering, because the more humans that exist, the less wild animal species that exist. Like, we've lost, I think in my comment, I even said that in the last...
It was 60%.
Yeah, 60 or 70% of wild animals. So yeah.
Yeah. I was going to interject and like link this to to the other point you made, but you've done it for me. So you can host my live streams from now on.
It's a much better job, Alex.
Yeah, exactly. You don't fuck it up as much as me. Yeah. Okay. Cool. John, do you want to share your thoughts first?
Yes, I'll jump in on the consent point, because I think it is really, really important. I think consent is massively important. I think there are cases when it is ethically justifiable to act without consent for those beings that can't consent. So, to give an example, a toddler, like a 2 or 3 year old child who is about to run out into the road, I think you're perfectly justified to pull them back against their consent to stop them from being hit by a car. And we frequently do this with babies. We give them medicines that they didn't consent to. We arguably give them food that they didn't consent to. We do lots of things to beings that don't have the capacity to consent for their own good. And when it comes to wild animals, again, we're talking about the good of the wild animal, but of the parent animal. But most importantly, we're talking about the generations and generations of animals that we know would live, those that lived for very long at all would live lives full of fear and danger, and in a consistent state of poverty as well, of constantly needing to look for food and water and this kind of thing. So I do think that it is justifiable to violate the consent of those that can't in certain circumstances, and I think that applies to spaying and neutering pets, and it applies for wild animals too. The point around human procreation, I think, is absolutely true. Like, humans, to one estimate, maybe are actually reducing the suffering of wild animals just by reducing the numbers. They're certainly not doing it in a way that Lawrence and I would approve of. If anything, a huge cause of extinction is things like animal agriculture and ocean dead zones, and you just think about what human beings are doing. But you could arguably live in a world where those wonderful grass-fed animals we all hear about that don't. It wouldn't be a vegan world. The whole world would just be grass-fed dairy pasture. There wouldn't be many cows because they're big animals, and this kind of thing. And there'd be less suffering in that world than the world we've got today, with both like factory farming and with wild animal suffering. I think that's definitely true. I think that's not something that we should pursue, because I think it creates a very confused moral message, if that makes sense. That we're saying that it's wrong to cause the suffering and death of animals, that we shouldn't be using animals for our own means, or any sentient beings for our own means, but we're going to do it to reduce the overall suffering in the world, like a ticker. I do think it is relevant, though, not to pursue human extinction too readily, which is something that we talked about last time, Lawrence, in that if all the humans go extinct and the world just flourishes into a beautiful, thriving ecosystem, there would just be a tremendous amount of suffering in nature and no one about who could do anything about that. We talked about vehement before, the voluntary human extinction movement. In the vehement world, where there are no moral agents who can do anything about the suffering, I think that would be a real travesty.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Lawrence?
Yeah, I got two things I wanted to say. The first one was, I agree. Like Alex said, like humans have been causing animals to go extinct, and so if someone were to follow that line of logic, someone could maybe say, oh, well, we should breed more humans because it's preventing like wild animals from coming into existence. And I agree. Whilst that might be like factually true, the reason that I would not promote something like that is because I don't think the ends always justify the means. I think at the end of the day, I celebrate that there are some non-human animals that are not going to be born that otherwise would have. But I don't celebrate the method by which it came around, because the method by which it came around was that they just got their homes destroyed and all killed. Do you get what I mean? So,
and replaced with farmed animals in many cases.
Yeah, exactly.
Farmed animals.
Yeah. So, I think even though like our goals of trying to prevent other beings from coming into existence, we may achieve them slower by doing it by ethical means. I think that's better than doing it by unethical means. One, because otherwise you'd be doing unethical shit. But also, I was actually reading today. I can't remember who said it, but I was reading a book, and in it they quoted someone who said that one of the reasons they do not support the sort of doing unethical things, always supporting like doing unethical things to achieve something that they see as ethical, is because if you want to achieve a world that you see as good, like it's actually important how you get there, because the way that you get to that world that you see as good is actually going to somewhat dictate what that world is. So if you get to a peaceful world by killing loads of people, well, you've just normalized killing people. So actually, are you really getting to a peaceful world? So I agree like with you, Alex, as in like if we followed the logic like hard and rational, it could take people to unethical places, but I think we just need to be wary of that and like keep our like guard up, if you get what I mean, and be very careful when we speak about these things so that we don't encourage people to go out and do unethical stuff. Do either of you have anything else you want to say on that before we go on to your third point?
I just want to make it clear too that I'm not for like
oh yeah
to like reduce animals by any means. That's like the worst thing you can do. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
Explaining that to your kid as well. Like, listen, I really think it's wrong to create sentient beings, but I'm hoping you'll trash the environment enough that the future wild animals won't be brought into existence.
So the third point that I picked up on in your comment, and again, if there were other points that you left in your comment that I haven't picked up on, you bring them up. But the third one that I picked up on was you were talking about how effective altruism, as it sort of exists today, supports, at least in the animal space, it supports a lot of like welfareism, and there are a couple of issues here, right? So, like obviously, I know John better because I've spoken more with John. I don't really know you, Alex, but from what I've seen from like talking to you and just this conversation, I would assume that you also agree that we want to get to like an abolitionist point, right, where we just don't want to be using animals, right? Yeah, exactly. So
100%, yeah.
yeah. So I think one of the concerns here is that, well, one, should we be promoting welfarism? But also another point that you raised is that, well, actually, welfarism has this sort of inbuilt sort of maybe ineffectiveness in it, where welfarist organizations are actually in the business of regulating rather than abolishing animal agriculture. And so they actually have a vested interest in animal agriculture continuing, because they've set up organizations that solely exist to change the laws concerning animal agriculture, and all of the people in those institutions and organizations, their jobs depend on it. So, and those organizations will build up over time. So maybe one of the organizations someone could point to is someone like the Humane League, or an organization like PETA or somewhere like that. These are, like, to my knowledge, I might be wrong, relatively large organizations that employ, you know, a significant number of people, and all of those people's jobs perhaps rely on animal agriculture actually continuing, otherwise they'd all be out of a job. So what do you think about that, John? Sort of like, should we be pursuing an EA sort of focus, because it could lead us to support welfarist rather than abolitionist things? And also it could, and through that we could actually be perpetuating the thing we're fighting against.
Yeah, I think here in the UK, we've got the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And through their RSPCA Assured scheme, they stick a label on animal products and then get paid to do so. And I remember this awful social media post that they made where they said something along the words of, if you're considering not eating meat or cutting down on meat, why don't you eat our products instead? So a complete compromise there. It was just so disappointing, where they are absolutely tied in. I think an organisation like the Humane League, though, is very different. They make it very clear that they are an abolitionist organisation, constantly promoting vegan food, vegan lifestyle, in their mission statements around ending all cruelty to animals. And I think it is possible to use welfarist means for abolitionist ends, especially with respect to antinatalism as well. So, for example, with regulations around how chickens are factory farmed, a lot of the cruelty and suffering comes from the fact that so many chickens are cramped into one space. So by reducing the number of chickens that are cramped into one space, you actually reduce the total number of beings brought into existence, and those that are brought into existence are suffer less than they otherwise would. So while we wouldn't consider that the end goal, we wouldn't look back and go, oh, happy chickens, this is what we want. We can certainly recognize that this is a positive step in terms of fewer animals being brought into existence and killed, and less suffering for those that unfortunately still are. And I think that's the kind of thing which the Humane League and animal equality and organisations like that are pushing.
And also, can I just quickly interject, because I think there's one thing which is super relevant to what you just said, which maybe you said it and I completely missed it, but anyway. So I think you know how you were saying welfarist means it can help to achieve abolitionist ends.
Yeah.
One of the ways I've heard people speak about this is that, say the example you gave where you win some legal battle where you're able to reduce the amount of chickens that any given farm can hold. That's actually going to reduce the amount of money they make as well. So it will financially cripple maybe it won't go as far as to cripple them, but it might financially harm the industry. So it will make them weaker and easier to eventually then kill off.
Yes, and the price of animal products will go up, which means that people will eat less meat. And as we know, there's a ton of research to say that mindset change follows behavior change. That once people stop eating meat, they find it easier to make the ethical connection with animals because it doesn't feel like a personal attack. And there are tons of people, like Vegan Gaines, for example. I know he's a controversial guy, but he got into it for health reasons, became a vegan activist. I got into it for environmental reasons, became an animal rights activist. I know people who just stopped eating meat because it was expensive and then became vegan activists. So by pushing these welfare, you're reducing the amount of meat that's consumed by pushing these welfare reforms. That makes sense. But again, just to go back to my first point, I think there is a very big difference between abolitionist organisations and abolitionist causes, and those which do, as you said, like that have a vested interest in seeing animal exploitation continue. We need to be very, very careful that we are not supporting the latter, that we are supporting the former.
Yeah, Mercy for Animals, actually, they definitely don't push an abolitionist message anymore at all. I mean, you can look at some of their undercover videos and even their website, and they'll say like reduce your flesh consumption, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't even necessarily always push veganism itself. So, and I guess a point would be like who would enforce these these new laws or restrictions that come up. So for example, like they'll say, okay, in 5 years you can only have X amount of chickens in a shed that's this size. Who's there to enforce that happening in 5 years? Because we've seen that with gestation crates. Like even in Canada, they've like put in place where they need to have like what's called group housing for pigs. So instead of them being in the single cages, they're kind of grouped together while they're gestating, and then in farrowing, it's the same thing. They just go into like they'll still be in farrowing crates. And I've been in some of these facilities, and the way that they get away with this is they still have gestation crates, and then they'll have a few pens that are group housing, and then that's considered satisfactory. And so the majority of sows are still within these gestation crates, but just because they have a couple pens with some, sows that aren't in gestation crates, and they're meeting the requirement and all is well. So the amount of suffering, I guess, in that instance is still the same, really, because for the majority, maybe for like
maybe marginally less, but not a huge amount.
It's not like a significant amount. So I guess like where would the enforcement come from? And that's it. That's my point.
I think it's all really important, and definitely that's a caution not to rest on your laurels and think that just because a law has been passed or a company is put on its website that it's changing its practices, that it actually tangible change is happening for animals. I think you raise a really important point about making sure the stuff's actually enforced. Do you have any thoughts, Lawrence?
The only thing I would say is like I do recognize that like even if we view these law changes as a good thing, they might not actually be adhered to. And actually, time and time again, we find out that probably I would even go as far as to say probably the majority of cases they're not adhered to, because there's just been so many exposés where they don't adhere to them. So the thing I would say about that is, whilst it may be the case that effective altruism at the moment supports like what could be labelled as like welfarist causes or organisations, that's not necessarily like the route that like the antinatalist community has to go down if we want to prevent humans from breeding more animals into existence. We can go down, other routes of trying to effectively, so for example, if you don't like supporting organizations that are, for example, promoted by EA, you can still do effective activism, just do a different type. Or donate to different places, right? So like you could donate to a charity that's promoted to curb human procreation or help wild animals, or go into some other cause that is determined to be effective.
Just say, Lawrence, as well, or another organisation in the same space. So EA promoted things like lab meat or alternative protein. I think it's the term. These alternative protein companies. So pushing out their non-animal sources of protein.
Yeah.
So.
And also, like the fact that these laws aren't enforced and it allows the industry to get away with existing in a way that is more financially profitable for them. You know, that could be that is a valid point to raise, and it could actually be that one of the effective things we can do is try and get those laws more enforced. Like maybe someone wanted to set up a watchdog so that I don't know if actually, because there might be people watching from around the world, a watchdog is basically an organization that keeps watch of the government and essentially checks or watches the government or an industry to check that regulations or laws are being followed. So you have police watchdogs to make sure that police are following their regulations and laws. You have watchdogs of politicians themselves, etc., etc. So it could be the case that an effective thing to do would be to set up one of these things or enhance existing ones working in the animal agriculture space. Yeah, but the final thing I'd say on that is like I 100% get where you're coming from with not wanting to support like welfarist policies, because even if they would make a tangible change to animals, I have like a sort of emotional response of like, I don't want to support that because I only want to support things that I view as like, you know, ending the thing rather than regulating it, if you get what I mean. And so on for that reason, I, you know, choose to donate to, so I personally, I donate more to like wild animal causes, because like you raise valid points about vested interests and stuff, and so I can just simply avoid those issues by just donating to a different effective cause. I'm still, you know, helping to bring about change in the world, hopefully, but I just avoid the issues of donating to those specific places, if you get what I mean. Do either of you have anything else you want to say on that, or anything else we've covered while Alex has been on?
No, I don't think so. My only other point when it comes to, you know, welfarism and less chickens or less chickens in the barn, etc., is like, yes, it does reduce the amount of suffering, but I guess it's not necessarily like, it's not eliminating it, and then it also gives people a sense of you know, like they're doing the right thing. Like people that still engage in animal exploitation, that buy these products, that, you know, what we were saying about the RSPCA, where it's like, oh, these cage-free chickens, or you know, whatever ridiculous humane washing labeling that they put. It kind of just like makes the person feel better about still doing the same shitty thing. And I think that kind of relates into not getting that like societal change, really, you know, because we're not really changing people's mindset in any way. It's like, oh, well, now I feel better about still doing the same crappy thing, and, you know, here we are. So that would be my only other point is
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that, and I think that's something that needs to be factored in when we make decisions about where we want to put our efforts. And like, I don't know if that's something EA has factored in how they're operating at the moment, but it's definitely something that we should factor in when we're making our decisions.
I would say this is something that has been researched quite a lot, and I'm not sure, fortunately, that on a large scale that kind of complacency has been observed amongst where there have been welfare reforms. It certainly makes intuitive sense that someone could feel better about it, but it doesn't seem to be the case that people who otherwise would have gone vegan are going, oh, okay, I'll go for the RSPCA assured kind of thing instead. I think Open Cages released, they've got like a series of resources that look at the research into that around like from welfare to rights, and how backsliding is definitely something that we should be concerned about, and we really do need to worry about that complacency. But fortunately, it doesn't appear to be being borne out in the data, for, at least as far as I understand it.
Cool. All right. So in the interest of time, and getting, because we've got someone else who's going to come on and share some like thoughts they have. Like, do you have any closing things you want to share, Alex? But if not, like, thanks so much for coming on. It's been great to talk to you.
No, that's it. It's good. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. We can still hear you. Yeah.
I'm good. So.
Okay, no worries.
Good chat.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And I will speak to you whenever I speak to you.
Yeah, sounds good. Bye.
Thanks, Alex.
Cheers, Alex.
Bye. Thanks,
Take care.
Bye.
Cool. Okay, so we should have Rob coming on soon. So I can see like Rob is in the waiting room coming through now. So hopefully he'll be in now. So yeah, if anyone has points that they want to share. Oh, Rob's in the room.
Hi, Rob.
Can you hear us?
I can.
Oh, nice. And we can hear you. Is it possible to move your mic a bit closer to your mouth, or is it stuck?
How's it now? I
Yeah.
bump the volume up.
No, that's decent. I think you're fine. Yeah, I think you're fine. Cool. Yeah, just before we start, I was just going to say, if anyone has thoughts they want to share at all on anything, just whack them in the chat. And if we have time at the end of the live stream, I'll go through the chat and we can maybe go over some, but like no promises, because I don't like, John's got a specific time he's got to leave and stuff like that. So, but if we have time, anyway, how are you doing, Rob?
Doing good, thank you.
Nice.
How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me on.
No, it's all good. I'm doing good. John looks like he's having too much of a good time with that grin, but I don't know.
Oh, sorry. Optimal. Now
Cool. I don't know if you at all, like I went over with Alex, if you at all want to give like a brief just introduction to yourself about like anything you want to share, or if you just want to go straight into points, it's up to you.
Oh, for sure, yeah, I can give a brief introduction. So yeah, I've been an animal rights activist for close to 4 years, so I continue to do animal rights outreach, mostly in the form of street outreach. And I'm also an antinatalist, if that wasn't obvious already. And I've been involved with Stop Having Kids for a little over a year. So I do handle the street outreach for Stop Having Kids in the west coast of USA.
Nice. So yeah, like I did with Alex, I've got like noted down what I think is like the key points of because you also left a comment. Do you want me to read what I've noted down, or do you just want to sort of let loose and share your thoughts yourself? It's up to you.
No, I think it'll be good if you go over those comments, just
Cool.
to kind of refresh my memory a bit.
Yeah, that's all good. So the main points that I picked out were that basically like we need to we do need to do. So basically, I think what you were saying is like you recognize like we need to do more than street outreach. And also, before I go on, I do want to like maybe it came across to people like John and I were shitting on street outreach like more than we actually feel is due. Like I definitely don't want to come across as shitting on street outreach. I think it has like benefits. I mean, one, for the activists themselves through building community, but also it does bring about change. It's just, we need to have conversations about like how much change, and, we only have so much time, what should we be spending it on, etc. But also, like we said before, like we don't know how effective it is with antinatalism, as opposed to veganism. So it's kind of a different ballpark, and we need to sort of, have the conversation and do more research and stuff. So, but yeah, so you were saying like we do need to do more than street outreach, but you thought that John and I were maybe going out of our way to dismiss it, which like, to be honest, looking back on our conversation, I can see how maybe someone would think that. So I think that's a fair comment. And then you said, do you think that just donating is going to bring us, as in like donating to what are considered effective charities, is going to actually bring about an anti-speciesist world with no animal agriculture? because if there are no individual effective activists that are going around, doing street outreach or maybe talks or something like that, who are we going to donate to? Individual change and systemic change are not mutually exclusive. So, yeah, what do you think about that, John? It's we shouldn't be sort of dismissing forms of activism. We need to have sort of like a broad church and pull on different forms of activism, including street outreach.
I think to some extent our conversation may have been an overcorrection when it comes to street outreach. I think maybe that we were too dismissive, as we already talked about. We don't know what street outreach as it relates to antinatalism, how effective it is, because we don't have the data, and we've got limited data as it relates to animal outreach. I think, and in terms of an overcorrection, what I mean is that from my experience in animal activism, and I'll be interested in your two experiences as well, things like street outreach is the priority, and things like donating or using your entire career to work for an effective nonprofit, these things are quite far down the list in terms of different forms of outreach that people can get involved in, or different ways that individuals can have impact. So potentially an overcorrection is needed to drag the conversation back towards these things which we do have more of a body of evidence towards in terms of donating and using one's career. In terms of having a broad narrative of activism, I'm hesitant on that just because of the data. And given that we are quite a small community, it might be the case that we need as many individuals as possible working in the most effective ones, and then potentially at some point down the line to diversify, if that makes sense. And I'm a bit hesitant to promote forms of activism that we don't have that data for, while the default is to go for those forms of activism, if that makes sense. So again, it could be the case that street outreach is very important and something that is needed. Again, I haven't seen the data one way or another, but I'm hesitant to say, no, it's an important part of it, just because, one, we don't have the data, and two, it is currently so underrepresented. So overrepresented in terms of animal activism, and it may well become overrepresented in terms of overrepresented with respect to other forms of outreach. In animal activism, it may become that way with antinatalist activism as well.
Just before we go on, Rob, are you able to maybe just move your mic a bit closer to your mouth, just because there's someone saying in the chat that your what do you call it, audio is lower than mine and John's. And I'm not sure how I can sort of change that through the software on my end. I can't really manipulate our individual inputs. So hopefully we'll just have to hopefully it'll just be bearable. Maybe also, John, if you move your mic slightly further away from your mouth, because you are actually pretty loud. Well, you've muted yourself now, so now we can't hear you at all. But anyway, so
apologies. I'll move it away slightly.
So I'll quickly share my thoughts on this sort of stuff. So yeah, with street outreach, again, I don't want to say anything like concrete about street outreach, especially with antinatalism, just because like we don't know yet. But I think it is. I do think it is good to, at least at this point in time, try out different forms of activism with antinatalism, but keeping the mindset of, if this doesn't work, like, we should change our tactics, and not getting emotionally attached to one form of activism. and that goes for anything, that could be even donating to charities. We might do research and find out that actually for antinatalism specifically, donating to charities is not the best thing to do, and so we shouldn't get emotionally attached to that either. Which is one of the key things that the EA model has been promoting. So I agree. I think at this early stage we do want to try a diverse range of tactics, and try as best we can to see what results we get, and also be willing to say, okay, if this wasn't that effective, let's change course, and try another avenue. Another thing I would actually say in favor of street outreach, and I know that this can also be achieved without street outreach, but it has proved, at least to my knowledge, very effective in doing this with animal rights. So it could be very effective with antinatalism. Is just that street outreach has a very big bonding effect between activists. And although other forms of activism also have a bonding effect, street outreach has a very low bar for entry. If you want to get a job in this sort of space, high bar for entry, you need to have qualifications, etc., etc. If you want to do some other form of activism which is more I don't even know, because I was going to use an animal rights example, but I don't think they're necessarily analogous to antinatalism. But if there was some form of antinatalist direct action, for example, I don't know what that would look like, but if there was, those sorts of things are scary for people. It could risk arrest, etc., etc. So there's again it's a high barrier for entry. Street outreach has a low barrier for entry, and it's very good at bonding people together, forming connections, from which those connections, that fertile community, other forms of activism can flourish. And we've seen that with animal rights. People in animal rights, people generally tend to start with street outreach. A lot of them do get just stuck in street outreach, but often people will sort of level up. I don't know if that's the best way of saying it, but move on to other forms of activism. Maybe I've got a biased sample because that's just how I entered animal rights, and I just meet other people who found the same. But I do think street outreach does have valuable it does have value, other than just the hardcore how many people are we converting. There's more value to it than that. So yeah, I don't know if either of you have any other thoughts that have come to mind that you want to share.
I just want to make sure if I'm audible. So I just bump the volume up.
Yeah, you're audible. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify first that when I provided my comments earlier, it was more a defense for the need, for the case for street outreach and antinatalism. I think from what I've seen, they aren't analogous, as you said. And currently, at least as I do with SHK activism, we are struggling to find people to join us, in the streets. But that hasn't stopped me from doing the activism. I still continue to do it anyway, because even when I do it solo, there is just so much engagement from the people. It's already obvious that I'm getting a lot of work done. I'm getting a lot of conversations that I wouldn't have otherwise had if I were to stick to online activism. Another thing to consider is that I think that in terms of efficiency and the cost it takes to set up a Stop Having Kids activism, it's just holding a bunch of signs. You don't need a TV, or you don't need an elaborate preparation and setup as you need for direct action. And the amount that one person can get done for Stop Having Kids activism is significant. If you were to compare animal rights outreaches, be it direct action or the Cube style outreach, so which is why my pushback was coming from that angle. It's more about I don't think we are in a position to question the effectiveness of antinatalist outreach. I think if anything, we need more people to join us. And from what I've seen, there's a lot of promise in antinatalist outreach, and I probably thought discussion wasn't very helpful because the antinatal outreach is still in its very nascent stages, and if anything, we need more data. We need more people to come on. We need more time for us to evaluate the effectiveness of street outreach. And to your point of like donating to charities, I definitely agree that it's very needed, at least in the vegan world, so to speak. Like one example that comes to mind is there is a charity here in the US where you donate money so that they have a lobby in Congress, so that you can remove subsidies. And now I see that as a change that's massively required, because one of the biggest excuses I hear as a vegan activist is vegan food is so expensive. But people don't think, why is vegan food so expensive? It's because of subsidies. The vegan food isn't propped up by subsidies like meat and dairy are. I definitely agree that we need to canvas for those campaigns. We need to donate to those campaigns. But I guess these points still aren't so applicable in the world of antinatalism. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, it does to me. John, did you have any thoughts? Because I spoke more recently than you.
Can you guys hear me at an appropriate level?
Unfortunately. No, I'm joking.
Definitely agree with your point, Rob, about the evaluative mechanism. The point being that we don't have the data, and it would be great to have that data. And I just can't. The data on like the effectiveness of antinatalist activism, of antinatalist street outreach. I'll just keep banging the data drum and think really carefully about how we can evaluate that. And going back to something you were saying earlier, Lawrence, around this being like an embryonic stage of antinatalist activism, we could create a culture of collecting data, of being really robust, that doesn't exist in animal rights outreach, because it is at this early stage, and I think that would be really, really great. Something you were saying earlier, Lawrence, about the bar for entry. I don't necessarily disagree. I absolutely agree with your analysis about the bar for entry being quite low for like street outreach compared to other forms of having impact. I just think that we need to, if we're thinking about impact, though, a high bar isn't necessarily a bad thing, because the number of individuals getting involved, in my opinion, is a lot less impactful, a lot less important than the ultimate impact that's had. For example, David Benatar and Peter Singer have extremely high bars to reach in terms of having their impact. Becoming world-renowned academics in elite institutions in the field of philosophy, extremely difficult to do. Very, very few make it. But the impact that they've had in terms of antinatalism and animal ethics in particular, I think is, as far as we could tell, very, very large, very, very, very impactful. They're both considered in some ways the leading light in terms of like philosophy on these subjects. And I don't think that, it would have been a shame if seeing a high bar would have put either of those individuals off from going for those extremely ambitious and extremely difficult choices. Like, we want people to be ambitious. It does tie into a point around, like, if we're being ambitious, you need to expect to fail. Like, if you're going for a difficult career, if you're looking to earn a lot of money or go and work directly, you have to be prepared to fail. And that's quite a difficult message to put out there. But I think we just need to bear in mind that if our focus is ultimate impact, the number of individuals getting involved and the bar for entry are, and a low bar for entry are not necessarily what we should be focusing on.
Yeah, no, one thing I want to say, I feel a bit weird saying rephrase on your behalf, but I want to rephrase it because I think you were saying something which it maybe didn't come across as what you were saying. So basically, I don't think you're saying, oh, we should only have people being active who are like the creme de la creme, the top of the top. You have to be Benatar level to do activism. I think what you're saying is like we shouldn't bring activism down to the lowest common denominator, if you get what I mean. If that's not too harsh a way of putting it. I think what you were saying is like we should focus on what is effective, whether that's a low or high bar. But there should still be forms of activism that are relatively low bar so that anyone can do, because it's not just like it. We shouldn't nurture a culture in antinatalist activism where we say, this is the effective thing to do, this is the bar you got to meet, and if you don't meet it, see you later. Like everyone who wants to do something should be welcomed, and we should have different things that people can do. But we should nurture a culture where everyone is having a conversation around, okay, these are the things I can do and I feel comfortable and able to do. What is the most effective way I can use my skills?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be this one form of activism that is deemed as the most effective God tier level of activism. It's just everyone needs to reflect on what they feel they can do and put in, and what's the most effective way they can do that, basically. Because I didn't want anyone to interpret what you were saying as we should find out what's effective, set that as the bar, and everyone else can get fucked, if you get what I mean.
No, absolutely. And I think that, trying to bring about the next David Benatar would be like one of those religious groups is always waiting for the next Messiah, so it's too far and wide to find them. As you're saying, it's about helping individuals really maximize their own potential for impact, for sure.
The only other...
doesn't have to be, I was going to say, that doesn't have to be particularly difficult. I remember a conversation with a vegan activist recently where I'd asked them how much they'd spent on travel to vegan activism, and they said something in the region of like £70-80 in the previous month or something like that. And it was considering whether or not that money could have been spent more effectively by donating it, and then that person could have potentially used that additional time working or doing a course to support their career. It goes back to your point earlier, Lawrence, just around helping and supporting individuals to maximize their own personal impact. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think actually that's a good way of framing it so that people don't come away with a sour taste in their mouth. Is it's not about dictating the form of activism that people do in terms of like, this is what is effective, this is what you must do. It's about helping nurture a culture where people view activism through how they can most effectively operate. Absolutely.
And that may manifest in different ways. So someone may the best use of someone's time may be doing a high earning career, but then another person may just not have the mindset or the skills or whatever to do that, and may prefer or not prefer, but like the most effective thing they can do is street outreach, and another person is campaigning or something like that. The other thing I wanted to say, bringing it back to street outreach, which I think is in street outreach's favor, is that street outreach is a very good way of generating consumable content for YouTube, which I think is a very good recruiter, because one thing that we should be thinking about is how can existing activists do things effectively, but another thing is how can we actually be recruiting people to engage in activism, right? And I think street outreach and videoing those street outreach things, which I know Stop Having Kids does do, I think that is a good thing to do as a form of recruitment, if you get what I mean. So yeah, that was the other thought I had. I didn't know if either of you had anything to say off the back of that, but yeah.
I did want to get to an earlier point, and this is regards to collecting metrics or data for street outreach. I do see that as a difficult endeavor, because if I were to think personally, in my journey when I was going vegan, I do recall like seeing posters, that those kind of planted a seed. Now, it is possible that when we do street outreach, we do plant seeds. We may not convert a person overnight, but seeds are definitely planted. And in terms of planting seeds, I think street outreach is a very effective means of doing so. But how do we measure or quantize that, if you will.
Mm.
That is another thing to consider. I'm not sure if it's even comparable with the amount of good, effective, and altruism would bring about.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's hard to it's hard to quantify how effective different forms of activism are, because the method that you're going to use is going to be different for each form of activism. And then actually when you get a result, you've got to find a way of, okay, how do we compare those? If you get what I mean, you've got to come up with some standardized way of comparing them, if you get what I mean. Because and also different forms of activism have different goals. Even though they're all like aiming towards the same end goal, in terms of antinatalist activism, like different forms of activism will be aiming at different things that all feed into that, if you get what I mean. So I agree. A separate conversation we need to have is how do we actually measure this effectiveness?
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, John. You probably are more knowledgeable about how effectiveness is sort of like gauged with like EA in general at the moment. I know you won't be able to just copy and paste that onto antinatalist activism. It's going to be different, but just to give us an idea, do you know how they do that for EA at the moment?
So it's very tricky when it comes to street outreach because human beings are complicated and messy, and if someone changes their behavior, it's pretty difficult for even that one person to truthfully, not saying they're being dishonest, but it's really like hindsight is really not 2020, and we're complicated and messy people. Even saying that, like, I think I was changed by this one thing is really difficult. Like self-reporting data is really difficult. Evaluating street outreach is really difficult. It's easier to evaluate things like money spent on certain campaigns for like corporate practice, for example, in terms of like animal welfare changes. In terms of like further resources, I know you're planning on linking some. At least I think you said earlier, Lawrence, in terms of linking some stuff. Don't want to put words in your mouth. The Humane League looked into like the impact of leafleting, and then there's also quite a lot around like corporate campaigns and stuff like that. I think I'll just reiterate my point earlier around the difficulty of evaluating street outreach, not meaning that one, we should either give up trying to evaluate it, or two, we should pursue it anyway because we don't know either way. I think if you had to choose between one form of activism, that the form of activism which is more robustly supported by data should be the one that we should pursue.
Cool. Did you have any other thoughts you wanted to bring up, Rob, or any other points that have come up since? I think that was the sort of key thing I got from your comment. Unless I've missed anything, like let me know.
No, I think that about covers it. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
And I just wanted to say as well, Lauren, sorry, and there's one thing that we criminally missed out last time is the social media content from Stop Having Kids, because that's impact away from the demo, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Than those that are just there. We should have really have mentioned that last time.
Oh, yeah.
Both big fans of Danny Shine. That shouldn't mean that we should all try and be Danny Shine, or we should all try and produce that content, because there could be saturation, and some people have got a certain knack for it and others than that. But that is a form of impact that we didn't consider in our first conversation. So
and actually, I remember, I think that is something you brought up in your comment, right? Is that Stop Having Kids do other things as well. So I think, well, they do the billboards. They've had national media or state media. I don't know how it works in America. And also they do like volunteer days and stuff, right? So
yes.
Like we was talking about street outreach, but obviously we've mentioned Stop Having Kids, but I don't want people to like necessarily think that like that's all Stop Having Kids do. They are like a wider organization with different like branches of activism, if you get what I mean. But cool, yeah. Do you have any final words you want to say, Rob, or are you all good?
I think I'm good on this point. I was wondering how we're looking in terms of time.
Well, we've got 20 minutes until John needs to leave. So it'd be good if there's a few other points other people have raised that we were going to quickly hit on when we'd finished going over your points. But if you have anything else you want to raise, we can maybe hit it in 1 or 2 minutes. But if you don't have anything, that's also fine. It's up to you.
Got it. No, I think the next point about to raise might take us on a big tangent. It might, need more than 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, cool. Okay, if you message me afterwards, or just whenever you have time, and I'll sort something out. Maybe John and I can do a short video that I'll upload that addresses the point or something like that. But yeah, just in the interest of being able to cover other people's points that they raised. Yeah, but cool. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, it's great to chat to you.
Cheers, Rob.
Cheers. Bye.
Nice one. Okay, 6. So it's just us again. So let's go to the next point. And okay, so I can see we've got 4 points left that people raised, and I've noted down. And we've got 20 minutes left, so that's about 5 minutes per point. So let's not try and ramble on this. Let's try and be fucking, effective.
I'll do my best. I love to ramble, but I'll try and be succinct.
All right, okay, 6. So the next point that someone brought up in comments that I've noted down is, so there are already loads of organizations that focus on countering or alleviating existing suffering, right? So people or individuals that, whether human or not, who already exist, obviously are suffering, and there's loads of organizations that address, that. So how effective actually would it be for antinatalists, who are the only people really concerned with, on a large scale, preventing suffering rather than addressing it while it's already here? How effective actually would it be for us to just throw our lot in with everyone else and focus on wild animals or domesticated animals, instead of actually focusing on the hardcore of let's stop future humans or future other beings coming into existence?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Let's see more antinatalist organizations. If anyone has a blueprint and the resources available and the drive and everything that's needed to start an effective charity, I personally would love to see more. I think, again, there's a trade-off with everything. If we take a big risk, it might not pay off in terms of starting a new antinatalist organization, whereas potentially it would have been safer to go for somewhere in the animal welfare space, for example. But yeah, so something you were saying earlier, Lawrence, about not being wedded to particular forms of activism and thinking big picture. I would love to see people start new organizations and initiatives in this space.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think there are 2 things that I would say about this. The first thing is, what you've just said is that, I agree. We need more, people and organizations working in this space, helping to, because I don't know if I'm getting grandiose here, but you could say that maybe the biggest cause is actually focusing on preventing new life from coming into existence rather than addressing life that already exists now. Obviously, we shouldn't neglect that, but given it's so addressed already to varying degrees in, who you're talking about, but given basically every organization that exists is focused on that, we do need, it's a very under sort of appreciated area to focus on. Well, actually, best way to do it is actually just to prevent it from all happening in the first place, if you get what I mean. So I agree, more organizations need to be started and etc. on this topic. The other thing I would say is I don't necessarily think we were saying in our conversation before that we should be focusing, the antinatalists should be diverting all their attention from preventing beings from existing and focusing on beings who already exist. We are somewhat saying that with obviously like encouraging people to focus on wild or domesticated animals. Obviously, we want to benefit beings who already exist, but I don't think either of us were saying that we should solely do that, because I think one of the ways that we were saying that we should address that, those two issues, for example, is by preventing more beings from coming into existence, right? Like, so for example, with wild animals, there are already people working on looking into how we can improve the lives of wild animals who already exist. So maybe Antinatalists should start an organization that specifically focuses on helping wild animals, but by how non-procreation can play a part in that. Absolutely, one example, Wild Animal Initiative, I'm not sure if they did the research. I doubt maybe they did. I don't want to say whether they did or not. I can't remember. But they wrote an article about some research that was done on pigeon populations in cities. Now, pigeon populations in cities are sort of like somewhat domesticated, somewhat wild, right? Then, it's not like humans are actively breeding them and stuff like that, at least not to my knowledge. Like, they are technically wild, but they live in and amongst humans and stuff. Rats would be another example, right? And mice. Often when pigeon or rat populations or whatever get too much, they are just mass culled through poison or some other thing. Now, there was research that was looking at how can contraception be used as a more humane method of doing that. So rather than allowing the animals to breed and then just, one, they're going to suffer anyway, but then also just kill them off, well, actually, why don't we introduce contraception into the food we know they're eating? Because we know what food they're eating. It's the leftover food we leave around in our cities. That's why they live here, right? So, it's research like that which I think antinatalists can focus on. It's not just about, let's not focus on human procreation and give up what antinatalism is about. No, we are still hoping to focus antinatalist activism around the core of preventing beings from existing, but applying that in a more diverse way and focusing on actually what is the most effective way of doing that, if you get what I mean. And that pigeon example is one example. I mean, imagine if that was rolled out, if contraception as a form of preventing pigeons from coming into existence, or crows, or whatever the animal is in cities. That seems like it would have a massive reduction on the amount of suffering that's going, and a massive reduction on the amount of beings who would be coming into existence, if you get what I mean. And that's just like one example. I don't think we were saying just to focus on beings who already exist. Antinatalists should be, still primarily concerned with how we can prevent beings from existing. But I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I agree, 100%.
Cool.
Let's have the next question.
All right, nice one. So effective altruism seems to be pussyfooting around the subject. And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, it means like beating around the bush, not going directly to the point. You're sort of like tiptoeing around it. So effective altruism seems to be pussyfooting around the subject of telling procreators. So if effective altruism was applied to antinatalism, the way we were talking about it, it seems to be beating around the bush and not just telling procreators what they're doing isn't right, and that it's and actually introducing EA into antinatalism is an unacceptable distraction from that. So what do you think about that?
I'm not sure I understood the question, sorry.
So basically at the moment, antinatalism, the way it's going, it seems like it would be going in the direction of essentially communicating to people procreation is wrong and you're doing something wrong by doing that. And EA is saying, well, actually, we maybe should be trying other ways of preventing beings from coming into existence. And the person who left this comment, unless I'm misrepresenting them, I'm so sorry if I am. They're saying that this is just a form of like pussyfooting around the issue. We should be going to procreators and telling them the moral argument and saying, no, what you're doing is wrong. And not doing that is kind of letting antinatalism down or something like that.
I'd be happy to push whichever message is most effective. I think there's some evidence to suggest with vegan outreach that it is very helpful to have vegans who say this is the moral baseline, and it creates a sense in oneself of this is a justice issue, and I'm not going to go back. And it's certainly you and I, Lawrence, never. Well, I mean, you might do, but we, don't sneak animal products on the side or think, well, I've done my,
Oh, well, you don't have days off? No, I'm joking.
Oh, I told you not to mention it, and you just mentioned it on stream. No. But we like having that firm stance has got a ton of benefits, but also the things like veganuary and meat-free Mondays and this kind of thing can help in terms of like a first step. So I don't really know. I wouldn't worry about pussyfooting around the subject if it was more impactful without violating other norms, like being deceitful or something like that. I think that antinatalists, and partly this is to do with like not wanting to be, of wanting to what's the word I'm looking for? To show antinatalism in a more positive light. I think proudly saying that we are antinatalists and that we think it's wrong to create sentient beings is important for movement building. It's important for not being accused of a bait and switch, saying, no, we just care about animals, but actually, we want you all to stop procreating. But that said, whichever method's more effective. I wouldn't worry about pussyfooting if it turned out to be more impactful.
I just I think I wouldn't label it as pussyfooting, to be honest. Like I do get that like there will be a place for some people to just fucking put the pedal to the metal and just say what you're doing is wrong, etc., etc. And that's fine if in that situation that's the best thing to do. But I just think like not doing that and trying to approach the situation from other ways is not pussyfooting. It's just basically saying, yeah, we can do that and tell people what they're doing is wrong, but actually what is coming from it? That's the main question is, okay, we're taking an action. What is coming from it? There may be something coming from it, but that's what we need to be asking ourselves. Is what I'm doing, is there something coming from it? I'll give one quick example before we move on to the next one. I went to an anti-fur march like a few years ago, and we literally just went round to different stores that sold fur and shouted at people who were going into it and putting stickers on the window saying like, go fur free or something like that. Now, maybe that had some impact, but when I was in that crowd, I was just kind of feeling like, I feel like everyone is here just to get like emotional gratification and just like let some energy off. Are we actually helping animals by doing this? Now, I'm not saying anything negative about anti-fur activism in general. I'm just saying that specific event I went to, it didn't seem like it was very productive. And what we were doing is going to people who were literally going into fur shops, pointing at them and saying, what you're doing is horrible, etc., etc. Now, maybe that got through to some of those people. I don't know, but it didn't feel to me like no one around me seemed to be saying, okay, this is what we're doing, but like what is it doing? Like, are we actually having an impact here? I think that's the important question. So I think to call it pussyfooting, I mean, you can call it that if you want, but then I don't really have an issue with pussyfooting, to be honest. Like, if pussyfooting is more effective, then let's do that. If it isn't, then don't do that. Cool. So the next one was, how should our focus be applied to animal suffering? So prevention or reduction. So again, I'm assuming this is about, should we be, if antinatalists are going to be concerned about animal suffering, which, we said that antinatalists probably should with domesticated animals and wild animals. How should that manifest? Should we be preventing beings from coming into existence or reducing the suffering of beings already existent? And this person says, antinatalism shtick is all about prevention. But if we're going to prevent beings from coming into existence, that would take us interfering with, with animals, right? And that requires a sufficient number of antinatalists to be willing to do that, to be willing to put the work in. And that's the best course of action. So we need to essentially, I think what they're saying is, to be able to do anything that we would consider effective, we actually need people, and to get people to become antinatalist activists, we need to spread antinatalism just as a general message rather than so I think what they're saying is effectivism is good, but maybe we need to focus on recruitment first. Maybe I can quickly go first on this one.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's a valid point. I think antinatalism stick is prevention, and that is what the preventative perspective is, what antinatalism is going to bring to all the different forms of activism it's going to cross over with, right? Whether that be AI, animal, human, whatever. And I agree. Being able to recruit people to then go on and do what we consider to be most effective. I agree. I think we should be recruiting people. The only thing I would say is, if the best thing to do is to recruit people, that is the most effective thing to do. So we're still doing the most effective thing, if you get what I mean. So I agree with this person. I think you need people to be able to do things effectively. And so if you need people to do things effectively, the most effective thing is to recruit people. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I agree.
Okay, nice. Final one, and we've got a whole 7 minutes to get into this one. So this person says, so given that humans cause so much suffering, right? EA, Effective Altruism, as it exists at the moment, promotes a lot of methods of doing good in the world that actually extend people's life. Yep. So for one example, EA is really big on combating malaria, right? So this will extend people's life because they won't die, younger of malaria. But this person says, well, this life extension may actually increase the overall harm that's going on in the world. So they give the example of malaria nets are widely promoted by EA, but these cause harm by being used as nets to catch marine animals. Plus, the people whose lives have been extended because they didn't die of malaria go on to cause harm to other humans, but also to animals, right? By eating them, etc. And so actually, by going around and doing this form of what you see as effective activism by helping existing people, you are then responsible, at least partially, for the harm they go on to cause. And also they may go on to reproduce as well. So what do you say to that? That actually using an EA framework may actually cause more harm because we may be engaging in forms of activism which will encourage people to reproduce.
I think this is an extremely important point. I'm not convinced, however, that some of the things that are recommended, like malaria prevention, necessarily do result in more harm. Like, for example, because a disproportionate amount of children die from malaria, like children make up a disproportionately large amount of victims. If a child being saved from malaria, if that occurs, then the evidence suggests that fewer children will then be brought into existence. So fewer individuals will be brought into existence. And in terms of their impact on meat eating, I'm not entirely convinced that some of the developing world kind of initiatives necessarily result in things like meat being caught. In terms of like meat being consumed and impact on animals, I'm not necessarily sure that the malaria nets have resulted in more fish being caught, if that makes sense.
Well, because if they catch fish, then it means they're not going to the supermarket and buying fish, if you get what I mean.
Well, maybe that, or maybe they will find other means of fishing and catching the same number.
Okay.
Malaria might be a more efficient way of doing it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have caught more. Like if you need 10 fish to feed your family, I'm not sure that having a malaria net to catch 10 fish in half an hour rather than 2 hours has necessarily resulted in more impact from that particular example. So I do think that the general principle that we need to be careful in terms of the impact that we would have, the potential negative impact of helping human beings is really, really important. That same principle applies to things like human extinction and impact on wild animals. We always need to be careful that our activism doesn't have knock-on effects that we haven't anticipated if we get too focused on like one particular solution to the problem.
Yeah, so the thing that I would say with this is I agree with this comment. Like, there are forms of activism that could be perceived as effective, but actually there are things that there are consequences of that activism that we're not taking into account that could mean that actually we're causing more harm. Like, that seems very obvious to me, very sensible point. I agree with that.
Absolutely.
And as like in response to that, I would say, well, even though we're applying the EA model, even if antinatalists want to apply the EA model to antinatalist activism, it doesn't mean we have to swallow everything EA do hook, line, and sinker. Like, maybe we want to improve the way that EA evaluates what is the most effective thing to do, right? So we don't have to be like a conjoined twin with EA. We can reinterpret EA and be a sort of breath of fresh air. And maybe we will come up with more effective ways of finding out what is the best thing to do. And then maybe the wider EA movement will adopt that. If they see us doing it and you know, they think that's sensible. Like, for example, I don't think it's very widely accepted in EA that actually preventing beings from existing in the first place is an effective way of preventing suffering, right? If we start to popularize that, maybe the wider EA movement will then take that on board. So, and which I think would be very good, right? So, I agree with what this person says, but I don't think it's a reason to be skeptical of introducing fucking hell, EA ideas.
It is.
I think it's a reason to build upon what EA are doing, because I think the sort of the grain that they've got, the sort of the nugget of EA that it's all built around seems good, right? Just maybe the way it's being implemented isn't the best way, but we can improve that. We're not EA. We're separate human being, or a separate group of human beings who see the world quite differently to EA, right? Even though we think that they have some valuable tools, but we can reinterpret them. So I think that's a point. We can reinterpret what EA are doing. The only other thing I would say is, if EA or even antinatalists are saying that they think X is an effective way of doing good, and you disagree with them, question it and get them to reassess, or just assess what you think is the most effective thing to do, but be honest about it. Don't just say, oh, I like doing this, so I'm going to say this is the most effective. You should say, they're saying this is the most effective, I'm skeptical about that for this reason, and I think that's a sound reason. So actually I'm gonna tell people that, and hopefully they react to that. But if they don't, I'm going to act on that, and I'm going to go in this direction and do what I think is the most effective thing. And I think that's totally valid. If someone doesn't want to, for example, donate to Against Malaria Foundation because they think it has unintended consequences that haven't been taken into account, then don't. Do something else you think is effective, but just keep in your mind, what is the most effective thing I can do? That's the only thing I would say about that. Do you have, you've got to go, so you say any final words you want to.
Thanks for having me on again, mate. Thank you, Rob, Alex, everyone who's engaged with this conversation so far. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Antinatalist Advocacy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We'd also be really grateful if you could help us get the word out there by sharing this episode far and wide, as well as giving us a positive rating on whichever platform you're listening to us on. To find out more about AA, including careers advice, donation recommendations, and different ways to have a positive impact, you can go to our website at antinatalistadvocacy.org. To keep up to date with what we're up to, feel free to subscribe to our monthly newsletter and follow us on your favourite social media platforms. Links to all of the above are in the description. As always, we are hoping you will join us in our antinatalist advocacy.